when the saints die, when they are martyred, God does a similar work in his people and on earth. And man, I have thought many times, like, what a misstep on their part. We're going to miss Charlie, and it has been a huge kick in the gut to think one of our conservative leaders nationally who is having such an impact is gone. But at the same time, what a misstep, guys, because the God of the universe is going to use the words of life that Charlie Kirk has been speaking, and he's going to raise up more than one Charlie Kirk in this whole mess.
Well, last week, the most successful and charismatic evangelist of our generation was murdered by a transgender terrorist who, it seems, was plugged in with a network with other extremists. And we learned that a very large portion of the country celebrated that, including here in Maine. Seems like a lot of Democrats, leftists, government employees, teachers, people who rely on taxpayer-funded grants. We'll go down the list and name every single one of them at the Maine Wire. But reflected the polling that's come out that shows leftists are they're accepting of political violence, and they think that it's a legitimate political tool. And the group of them willing to drop the mask in the wake of Charlie Kirk's assassination was horrifying. And I think that I've been, like everybody who works in this space, kind of reckoning with why does Charlie's assassination feel so heavy and like uniquely powerful? Like the gravity of this moment is so extreme, even though very few of us actually like knew him on a friendly level, weren't lucky enough to know him. And we weren't friends by any stretch, but like one of the last public events he did, I was invited to talk with him for very briefly behind the scenes and then moderate a forum with him. So it shouldn't be hitting me as heavy as it is on one level, logically, but I've been thinking about it a lot. And I think part of it is that young conservatives who are in public life, who are in the media, who are in politics, and frankly, just all young people see a little bit of ourselves in Charlie as a 31-year-old who was going out in public and speaking his mind. Mm-hmm. And so we see ourselves vicariously going through the experience that he went through, that his family went through, that his kids are now going through. And we see also the celebrations on the left of these ghouls and goblins and think, well, if they killed Charlie for having a very, very non-objectionable, friendly, outgoing, graceful, tolerant, accepting worldview and just being open and civil about it, then they would kill me. And if they celebrated Charlie's death, they would celebrate my death. And how can we exist in civil society with people who believe that murder, assassination, terrorism is an acceptable expression of their political views? And they are government officials, including some at the highest level. And just to name one, Regina Phillips, a Portland city councilor, on Facebook was celebrating the assassination of Charlie Kirk. This is a woman who is the sister of a state senator, Rachel Talbot Ross, former Speaker of the House. She's a city councilor in Portland, and she runs the Cross-Cultural Community Services, a nonprofit that gets huge taxpayer contracts. And she had no problem going on social media and celebrating the assassination of Charlie Kirk. She's a member of the left-wing intelligentsia here in Maine. I'm sure that there were a lot of liberals and leftists who felt the same way she did, but were maybe smart enough to not go on Facebook and set their careers on fire by posting something about it. It's this weird moment where you want to be graceful and you want to, think, well, what would Charlie do in this moment? But you also wonder about everyone on the left. Like, would those people react that way if somebody came up and shot me in the throat? Would they be happy and celebrating? And I guess I take it as a compliment that a lot of people have, come up to me to, remind me that I should be safe. It's a compliment and one I don't deserve in this moment, but it's just a reality now that all conservatives in public life have to face. But we also have to navigate forward not only with our safety in mind, but with knowing that we have to attempt to reforge in this new era a civil society with this not insignificantly sized cohort of people who celebrate political terrorism, including the murder of a 31-year-old husband and father, by a transgender terrorism for his Christianity, a true Christian martyr, regardless of what District Attorney Jackie Sartoris thinks about her half-baked conspiracy theories that she posted online and then deleted. He was a Christian martyr, murdered because he was a Christian by transgender extremists from the left, and all left-wing terrorism and all political violence is coming from the left. All violence is coming from the left. There are no stores boarding up their windows right now. They're, like they did during the Black Lives Matter riots. Everybody knows this. Everybody knows this intuitively. There are political people out there trying to make the case that it's a both sides thing. It's not, and everybody knows it, and it's a lie. And anyone who tells you it's a both sides thing, they're lying to you for political reasons. That political violence is exclusively the domain of the left, and everybody knows it. So given that, to help us figure out how to navigate forward in this new era of Maine politics, of American politics, Nick Andolfsen from the Christian Civic League, how I can't think of anybody better to explain how we walk in grace and navigate this path forward, because I know from our conversations, you, like many other people in this space, are trying to figure out how do you deal with the new era of American politics.
Yeah, I mean, there's thanks for having me, Steve. There are so many places we could go with this conversation, right? And I want to start by, I love history, and I've always read stories of the men and women of history to kind of guide my life, right? And Charlie's story is going to be one that's written down in history, and I hope it guides my future, guides my children and my children's children as to how they live and the kinds of things they do. But 1956, in January of 1956, 5 young men were missionaries in the Amazon jungle in Ecuador. And all 5 of them were murdered by the Waodani tribe, a tribe of people who had never met Jesus, let alone white men. These men were there to preach Christ. They were murdered. But in 1956, there was national mourning that happened because these men took their faith. They took what they held most dear, all right around the age of Charlie, a little bit younger, all ready to give their lives for that, for the gospel going to the world, right? And so as this has happened, I keep thinking back to this story. And one of them, Jim Elliot, probably the most famous because his wife really took his mantle. And one of the things that he said in his journals as a very young man was, it was something like, he is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose. And I think as I look at this doesn't guide you in how to deal specifically with the politics of the day, but when I look at Charlie's life, I see somebody who believed, and not just believed, but acted on every bit of that belief, that he is no fool who gives what he knew he couldn't keep his life. His life was temporary, and he was willing to give that if he could gain souls, if he could gain lives. And I just, the killer, and it's, I think that group is larger than just one young man. Right? Because there are people that informed that. There are people that motivated that. There are people that drove and justified
and funded
that killing and funded that killing from around this country. But that killer thought, you know what? I'm going to take his life. God doesn't deal in the temporary that we deal in. He doesn't deal in this temporary, our existence here on this earth. He deals in an eternal context. You can take the life of a man, but what you cannot take, you cannot remove the words of life of that man. And so part of going forward for me is recognizing that the words of life that Charlie spoke are going to have an impact, I believe, not just in the next year or 2 years, but in the next generations. The same way those 5 men impacted my walk, my faith, as I grew, Charlie's going to continue to impact the world going forward. Man, I also think of Acts chapter 4. This is right after Jesus went back to heaven. Peter and John were preaching. They had just healed a guy. They were preaching Christ. And the Sanhedrin, the Pharisees, they were the political and religious leaders of the day. They were the intellectual elite. They pulled him in. They had their guard come. They pulled him in. They had this conversation with him, and Peter and John spoke truth to them. And there's a verse in Acts chapter 4, and I'm not going to quote it exactly right, like Charlie would have been able to. But essentially they said they looked at these guys, and having seen their boldness and recognizing that these were uneducated, common men, they realized these guys have been with Jesus. And there's a second part to this story that I think is almost even more powerful than that they had been with Jesus. So these guys, these political leaders, the intellectual elite, said essentially, be silent. We're going to silence you. Shut up. Stop talking, and you're going to be okay. You can go away from here. They looked at them, Peter and John looked at them, and they said a few things, but they ended it with this: we cannot but speak of what we have seen and heard. And I just, over and over in my head, since this happened, I keep thinking of Charlie, and in the context of that story, I will never be as smart as Charlie Kirk. That guy was extraordinary. He had facts in his head. The facts were intertwined with his heart. It was real. It was a deep faith. There are very few people in the world that can do what he did. But we as believers, we as conservatives, are called to continue what he was doing. And maybe we can't do it just like him, but you know what? The Pharisees, the intellectual elite of the day, recognized that Peter and John had been with Jesus. And that's why they were so powerful. And so I've got that calling on me that, like, maybe I can't be Charlie Kirk, but man, I'm going to be with Jesus, and I'm not going to be silent. And I'm going to, like Peter and John, like Charlie Kirk did for years, I cannot but speak of the things that I've seen and heard, of what I've seen God do. And that's what Charlie did, and that's just the most convicting thing for me. And so, yeah, that's not a direct how we respond to the politics, but personally, that's how I'm responding is, man, I am so convicted by the life that Charlie led. There are many times where I have played along or used the pretend language maybe that the other side uses. And we got to be done pretending. We got to speak what is true and speak what is right. Yeah, we got to do it with grace, but we got to do it with boldness. And we got to be willing, like the apostles said, like Charlie Kirk said with his life over and over and over, sorry, do what you want to me, but I cannot but speak. I gotta speak this stuff. It's too powerful for me to keep silent.
Very well said. I think that's the message that I saw written on the hearts of 700 or 800 people out at the vigil in Augusta. And I know there were similar numbers that turned out in Portland and Bangor, and there are more happening across the state. There was some anger, yes, but it was more like a quiet resolve, in a sense that, we're done pretending. Yeah. We're done pretending that there's like an equivalence between, the word of God and biblical morality, and this like fake moral code that gets invented in Discord chats, and, it changes all the time, and it's weird, and like it's all about sex fetishes, and try to impose it through government, and it results in radicalized murderers. Like, we're done pretending that there's an equivalence between the two moral codes.
You just in referencing the quote Discord chats, that right there is the heart of much of this, right? What Charlie brought to the table through the truth of the Word of God and a whole lot of just common sense that all has its roots in biblical values, but common sense life principles, whether it's politics or, what time you get up in the morning, what he brought brings a life into accord, into unity with it, like to make you effective, to make you the family man or woman that you're called to be, or to make you, the reporter that you're called to be, to make you the influence you are supposed to be. You got to be brought into accord, into like unity in your heart, and that and much of what he spoke about does that to a person, in contrast to what the left apparently wants to happen, and that's discord. As much discord as possible. And when you can create discord, when you can create upheaval, when you can create confusion, you can turn hearts and minds. You can win hearts and minds because they don't know where to turn. And that's what we've done with so many of our youth. When you begin to speak into the transgender community, you are speaking to hurt and broken people. And I'm not trying to stereotype here. I'm saying that the left has co-opted people who were in discord for their own political purposes, for their own political gain. And we cannot abide that anymore. We can't sit by and think that it's okay. We have been living the stupid old fairy tale of the emperor's new clothes, right? We have been living that in real life, and too much, where all the adults standing along the side clapping for this guy with no clothes. Mm-hmm. And we've watched with the girls' sports, right? The kids, actually, the kids on dad's shoulders saying, yeah, I think you guys are pretending because he looks pretty naked to me.
Yeah. Just a funny generational thing. Discord is actually the name of the social media platform where the transgender individual was speaking. Mm-hmm. I didn't mean it as in discordant.
Yeah. No, but, I know.
Oh, okay.
Well, okay. I'm not going to pretend I know a lot about social media platforms. Yeah. You know me better than that.
But it does. It is ironic though that's the name of the platform.
The irony. Yeah.
Where this individual appears to have connected with other social misfits. Yeah. And I think that there is something also like physical and real to the brokenness of the people who have been co-opted by this movement, because we've allowed them to permanently ruin their bodies in a way that we don't allow people to, smoke, get tattoos.
I wish
go
it
to
was
tanning
just
beds.
allowed.
Yeah.
Right. But we haven't just allowed it.
Oh, yeah, we've subsidized it and we've encouraged
it. Subsidized
it.
it.
We've actually passed laws in this state where if you walk into a therapist's office and say, I'm gender confused, the only thing they're legally allowed to do is encourage you to permanently disfigure your body. That's just the reality of the anti-conversion law that the House Speaker Ryan Fecteau supported. So we've subsidized it, we've encouraged it, we've made it a moral good to convert as many people over to transgenderism as possible in our schools, in civil society. We've waged war on Christianity and Christian institutions that would be the bulwark against this. And the result of it is, if you have people who are fed this lie, it's not like they can just be convinced that transgender ideology is wrong, because they've permanently changed their bodies. And it's not just the surgeries, it's the cross-sex hormones that are irreversible. It's the whatever drugs that these young children are put on to aid and abet the trans ideology. It permanently alters their future in terms of their ability to have sexual pleasure, their ability to procreate, their ability fundamentally to experience human existence is changed forever by the drugs that are fed into them by adults who should know better. Adults they trust, and adults who should know better but don't, and feel public pressure or ideological pressure, whatever it is. And so now they're going to grow up and they're going to learn that they were fed this lie. And of course they're going to be angry. Of course they're going to have a lot of resentment. I don't blame them at all. And I've been somewhat joking that this is gender affirming violence, but that's what it is. This is the ultimate expression of transgenderism. If they can't get you to say the pronouns, if they can't get you to believe this made-up transgender bullshit, they're going to come kill you. And that is what they did to Charlie, because he was a messenger of Christianity and the alternative reality-based, Bible-based worldview about human sexuality that, like, Barack Obama supported. Okay, like this is the morality that Barack Obama espoused when he was elected president of the United States. This is the morality that Joe Biden purported to espouse, and these are not wild like far right positions. This has happened very, very quickly, and it was all invented in college campuses and social media chats like a cup of coffee ago. And they're trying to pretend like this is the fundamental moral truth of our existence. And as a result, there's a lot of confusion that's been created on the left. And I think it's incumbent upon left-wing leaders, whoever they are in this state, I guess that's the elected Democratic officials, it's incumbent upon them to go beyond this statement of, we condemn political violence. Well, it's kind of sad that you have to put a statement out like that. And I get like everybody was, all political groups were putting out some form of statement or sending out messages. We sent out, I sent out a column about it, an obituary of sorts, but like it should just be assumed and understood. We shouldn't be like going to Shinabello's
you
Facebook
shouldn't have to
see.
make a public statement on political violence, right?
But like we shouldn't be like wondering,
right.
Did Shenna put out a statement? Did Troy put out a statement? Like, are they actually going to condemn this? Because it was very much an open question, and I'm sure that behind the scenes they were like, "Gee, should we like?" Should we condemn this political assassination? How's this going to play with the Democratic base? And it's a real question. Like, how is that going to play with the Democratic base? Because according to the polling and according to what we're seeing on social media, a not insignificant part of the Democratic base is pretty happy about this. And I think that, the call now comes to the Democratic leaders to, what are you going to do? Like, what concrete steps are you going to take to turn off this rage machine that you have created and that you are politically benefiting from? I haven't seen anything, and to be fair, I haven't seen like it's not like the Republicans have come forward and said like here's our plan. It's very soon and immediate afterward, but I haven't seen anything that the Democrats in this state are doing to lower the temperature or prevent something like this from happening in the state of Maine. And I've been thinking about like, well, what is like my role, what is our role as, a growing media outlet, the biggest conservative media outlet for sure in the state? What is our role in this? And I've been thinking like, well, maybe we help lower the temperature by trying to hold an event with like Governor LePage and Governor Mills, and they come together and they can talk about, politics in Maine or something. Or we invite, the Democratic candidates for governor come in here and talk, and they're all welcome to come in here. But also, I don't know, there's something in me that's not really feeling like reaching out to people who, are relying on the votes of people who want me murdered.
Yeah.
Maybe it's something that I need to pray on, but I'm not really feeling like reaching out. I can count on one hand the number of people on the left in this state who have reached out to me and said, hey man, like, I know that this is going to be like a heavy time for you. I can count on one hand.
Yeah.
Which is, and they all know how to get a hold of me.
It also speaks to this culture of fear that we've created inside our political system. And I think Maine is especially an example of that, where people don't want to speak up because they don't want to lose their job. And their fear is justified in some ways because they've seen people lose it. But what I'd say is this is the point at which we are challenged, that we cannot be silent. We have to speak up. I got a message from a guy who said, hey, we had 8 hours off when George Floyd was killed in 2020, and I asked my boss, and she said, not in this case, because he hates people and he's a bigot. And he said, I walked out of the office thinking, well, is that what she thinks of me? Because I think exactly the same way.
That's why it's so heavy for people. It's so heavy for people because you might not have believed everything that Charlie believed, but you believed a lot of what he believed. Yeah. Because even the people who have like, have taken like hollowed out Christianity and they're walking around in like a Christian skin suit, pretending it's humanism or whatever, but it's just biblical based morality. And they think that they came up with it by themselves through pure reason. Even those people have a huge degree of overlap with Charlie's morality and his beliefs. So there's a lot of people who look at Charlie and say like, geez, do they feel that way about me? And to your point about the, getting 8 hours off, the Portland Public Schools, we published an email last night where the Portland Public Schools Steering Committee, some brave soul, sent out an email saying, hey, what are we going to do about the Charlie Kirk thing? Because in 2020, we had counselors available and we had like a lot of social services available. And like we made a deliberate strategic effort to recognize the momentousness of this event. And someone emailed back and was like, bleep off, basically. That is a crude vulgarization of what was said, but that was the tenor of it. And then someone emails back like, let's take this offline, recognizing that it shouldn't be on the all campus.
Might come from the.
It wasn't even that. This was the all campus email system. This was sent out on the all campus email system. So there was there is, there is that attitude on the left that is brazen and very prevalent. And the wild thing is that, like, before I had an opportunity to meet Charlie, I had this preconceived notion of him as like a conservative influencer. And I've met a lot of them through like working for Howie Carr, working at Barstool. I've met a lot of those influencer types. And I had this preconceived notion of him that he was maybe like a little bit more of a clout chaser and kind of like really wanted to be famous, a famous influential conservative guy, whatever. And maybe he wanted that as a tool to what he was trying to accomplish. But I was really like, I guess, taken aback by how humble and genuine and authentic he was. Yeah. And the event was on August 7th, and I'd been thinking a lot about like the gap between my preconception of him and the guy that I actually met for just an hour and talked Maine politics, and his like frankness and intelligence and honesty, and then got to do the, narrate the event with him. And it was like, we'd been friends forever because there was this ease about the way that he communicated in front of crowds that was really magnetic. But I've been thinking a lot about the gap between my preconceived notions of him and the man that I actually got to meet. And I listened to his interview with Tucker Carlson, and it was like there was a whole nother level of intellectual depth and thoughtfulness there. And when he talked about his project being de-radicalization, and having people engage in civil discussion in order to prevent revolution, that really, really hit home with me. And I thought about it a lot in the weeks leading up to his assassination, and have obviously thought about it more. And I think that there's how many of us can say that we have, if at the end of our days, if somebody were to go back and look at all of the videotaped conversations we'd ever had, all the political arguments we've ever had, that are on camera, and you could go back and look at them all, and they all stand up. Like, I have yet to find a video that someone has put forward to say like, here is proof that Charlie Kirk was a racist, bigot, fascist. All the invectives that have been hurled at him. They're so lacking in supply of material to make him out to be the demon that they had convinced themselves he was, that they have to invent false quotes. Like Karen Attiah, the Washington Post columnist, just made up a quote and attributed it to him, and then got fired and is now complaining that she was fired. But they've got this just absolute caricature in their minds of what he was. And I was a victim of that too. Like it's not like I thought that he was anything bad. I just thought that maybe, I didn't have an accurate.
He was just looking for fame.
Yeah, right? I just didn't
like
have an accurate.
Else, or,
I didn't have an accurate impression of him. So I don't know. It's been something that I've been grappling with as well. The gap in my understanding, and wanting to, I guess, leave behind a similar legacy. Looking at that, everyone's going back and looking at more and more of his videos, and they're like, "Wow, holy cow!" Yeah. Like he was like sent by God. Like had just a charmed existence. Like all of his discussions were so like, there was one that Elon tweeted out yesterday or the day before, where this guy comes up and kind of looks like a young Timothy McVeigh, and he's like trying to push real hard from a like anti-gay conservative perspective. Like if you associate with a gay person, you can't be conservative or something like that. And Charlie just talks with him and just gives this really reasonable like perspective on like how like gay people should be welcome in the conservative movement, and like there's like your personal beliefs as opposed to your civil beliefs, and this whole he says it better than I'll ever say it, and would be able to articulate it in an exchange like that. But it's like, well, this is one of the main criticisms, that this is what he was killed for, supposedly, was being a transphobe and like a homophobic bigot. This is someone convinced themselves of this and went and murdered him over it. Yeah. And here we have real video evidence of him being like, no, that's not at all what the gospel tells me to do. That's not at all the walk that I feel like I have to walk in my life, and how I'm going to interact with these people. So it's been a challenge for me to navigate the distance between the preconceptions of him versus the reality of him.
Yeah. So we just posted on our social media platforms. It's not related to Charlie Kirk, but just a message from Dr. Jim Culbertson from New England Bible College. And this is recorded pre-Charlie Kirk, but he used a quote from a theologian, Wayne Grudem, at the end. And I'm not going to remember the whole quote, but in the quote, he uses the word winsome, that we as Christians, as conservatives, need to not red-faced and angry argue our point, but winsome. And he describes kind of what doing it with grace looks like. And that word winsome keeps sticking out to me because I've heard others describe Charlie as winsome. And in everything he did, it was with pleasantness, with grace, but also with boldness. And it's a hard line to walk. And it's one that I have to, on a regular basis, on my knees, say, God, I need your help walking that line of what grace looks like and what boldness looks like. But we're in a world where it's easy for grace to look like sort of backing down, right? Maybe not all the way, but maybe conciliatory speech. Yeah. And I was chatting with a friend the other day, remembering more than 10 years ago now in the LePage years, and we were at DHHS, and we were making all kinds of changes to the programs at DHHS, and they were really good changes. We were getting our house in order financially. We were working to make sure that people who were truly in need were the ones in the program, not people who were going to take advantage of the safety net for their own benefit, but to be used by those who really need it. The things, and it wasn't me personally, I was behind the scenes, but the things that Governor LePage or my boss, Mary Mayhew, were called in that process, I mean, they were killers. They were, according to what was going on the left, they were literally killing people and taking their lives. And, back then, I didn't really think that much of it. I was like, this is just kind of par for the course in politics. But after the last couple of weeks, looking back to those years, that their dialogue changed around healthcare.
Yeah.
And they've continued to ratchet it up.
Yeah, and we should just name exactly who those parties are. I mean, this is the Maine People's Alliance. This is the Maine People's Resource Center. Yep. They're like a $10 million a year dark money nonprofit that are heavily influential in this state. There are Senator Mike Tipping is an employee of this organization, long time. Yeah. There's a member of the House of Representatives who's an employee of this organization. They're heavily influential in Maine politics. They're funded by George Soros. They're funded by the SEIU. They're funded by this panoply of left-wing groups. Representative Jared Golden and Representative Shelley Pingree both voted for them to get $500,000 in taxpayer money from the Inflation Reduction Act. These are dark money left-wing groups funded by the highest levels of the progressive left infrastructure that fund, Democratic candidates throughout the state of Maine, and that also, by the way, own the largest newspaper company, the Portland Press Herald, which just yesterday, published a column, jumping up and down for attention by, trying to sneer at Charlie Kirk's legacy. That they made a website that's been on my mind related to the point that you were just making about how Paul LePage was accused of murder for wanting work requirements in Medicaid and refusing to expand Medicaid, which has been a disastrous policy for the state of Maine, by the way. Like, more people have probably died as a result of Medicaid expansion than the left claimed at the time would die if you didn't expand it. They made a website specifically dedicated to like 147 or something. That was the number of people that they claimed died every month or every year. I forget what it was because it was so absurd. But they had some, Soros paid for some study to say this is the excess morality from not expanding Medicaid. They took it as concrete fact. They made a website, and then they walked around completely convinced that all of those people had been murdered by Paul LePage. And it was exactly that kind of rhetoric evolving over time that led and culminated in this moment. So they should all be ashamed of themselves, and they should all be called out for it.
We all should be shocked, and it should feel like a kick in the gut. But looking back, we shouldn't be surprised, because that is, to your point, that is where the rhetoric was leading. And if it's something as simple as a basic conservative policy, if you go talk to somebody who spent their life working hard on the farm, I just spent a week with my grandparents, you talk to them about the power of work in their life and the danger of welfare programs that become entrapping that you can't get out of. I mean, their perspective is, quote, killing people based on the left standards. They don't care about politics. In fact, these grandparents are Canadian, and I mean, they really don't care about politics, right? But they have a work ethic, and they have a set of morals that are based on the truths of the Word of God and based on almost 90 years of life experience. They're not killers.
Yeah. And I think that the response to that kind of rhetoric needs to be one, okay, if you say those kind of things, you're not a serious person and you forfeit your right to have your opinion given any weight. You're just like, you're blocked out of the conversation because you're just not a serious person.
It's disqualifying
Yeah,
in every way. Yeah,
right? Like if you're a politician who gets the endorsements from these groups, disqualified. If you're espousing this kind of rhetoric, disqualified. That should just be a moderate, middle of the road opinion that Mainers can share. Like if you're saying that words are violence and kill people, or policies are violence and kill people, like just that's too far, and you've forfeited your right to have a valid opinion, in my view. I think that's the perspective that conservatives should bring into the discussion. And there needs to be some responsibility. There needs to be some responsibility. Yeah. And I think that elected Republicans have, through the way they conduct themselves, a role in enforcing that as well. They shouldn't be conciliatory. They shouldn't be bowing down. They shouldn't be looking for concessions from these people who hate them.
Yeah, it's silent no more, right? Like we cannot abide the pretending. And I'm no free speech expert, and I won't pretend to be. But all this debate around, don't I have the free speech to say disparaging things and cheer that he died? Well, to back up, I'm sure there's a legal conversation there, but for me, at its core, it's what you just said. That's disqualifying. Yeah. If that's who you are, you should not be around my children.
Yeah.
You should not be teaching them in school. Maybe there are jobs where your opinions don't matter. That's a whole different conversation. But if that's who we are, that's disqualifying. And we need to say that.
Yes.
And
I mean,
it's not trampling free speech to say.
It's not, but I think there are nuances to the discussion, so I think it's worth getting into. Because Attorney General Pam Bondi came out yesterday or the day before and said something about, that's hate speech and we're going to persecute it. And everybody was like, what are you doing, Pam Bondi? Charlie Kirk dedicated his life to this idea that words were not violence, and you can't be locked up or persecuted by the government merely for the things you say, unless it's like an actual, articulated, credible threat of violence against somebody. There's a narrow provision where speech can be considered something that you can be held accountable for. If it's an actual, articulated, credible threat of violence that you're planning on carrying out, then yes, you could be prosecuted for that. But merely for espousing opinions, there's no such thing as hate speech. There's speech that people hate, but there's no such thing as hate speech. And Charlie, the right, a significant portion of the conservative legal movement has dedicated their careers to shooting down hate speech laws, because they would be wielded as a weapon by the progressive establishment. So people were shocked and appalled and calling for Pam Bondi's resignation for fumbling something so basic. And she tried to walk it back by saying, well, only the credible, articulable threats is what we're going after. But it was shocking to see the Attorney General get something so wrong in such a big moment on such a big stage.
It's super easy to react in this moment, right? And react in a way that I don't want the other side reacting to me. I also think it's hard in life to create the distinction between what is acceptable in a civil society versus what is legal in a civil society.
Yeah, what should be punished by government versus what is acceptable in culture, and what should be socially shamed, culturally ostracized, and shame is a powerful tool. We've lost shame in our society.
If I get on this microphone and I say something that's wildly inappropriate, my board and hopefully several dozen pastors around the state will hold me accountable and say, hey, you can't say stuff like that. Go find a different job. That's appropriate. That is appropriate accountability when I say something that's disqualifying for the role that I'm in. And I think we've been afraid to even allow that kind of essentially social decency construct within our communities. And I'm the Christian Civic League, right? I'm from the Christian Civic League. So to me, it all comes back to our roots here in the Word of God, but back to some of the very first institutions like family. That's something I need to be teaching my kids, that no, that's not how you speak to your siblings. It's definitely not how you speak to somebody else's kids. But we need to learn that young. And that's got to be part of our social, civil society. And it just, I think we've also had we have a generation that much of was discipled by or taught by social media or their friends at school. And what I think is interesting is that generation that was discipled by social media are the ones going like, hey, yeah, this isn't working. And they were buying what Charlie was talking about because they saw life not working and they wanted something different. They wanted something real.
And they've got this little thing inside them called a soul that has some way of perceiving the truth. And they know that something isn't right about what they're being fed. And, just to, I guess, put a different perspective on what you were saying, I think it's just like, it's the babysitter test. If you're interviewing someone who is going to be a babysitter for you and they say, oh man, was I happy when I saw that guy get killed. Well, you're probably not going to hire them as a babysitter.
Right.
Doesn't matter what your politics are. Doesn't matter who they're talking about. Like if they were happy to seeing someone get shot, then you're not going to hire them as a babysitter. So why would you be okay with it being a public school teacher? Why would you be okay with them being someone who works at child health, child services?
Right.
Why would you be okay with them being in an elected office? You wouldn't be. And so you're not calling for this person to be, have the police visit them and lock them up.
No.
You're just saying that they've lost the benefits of being in trusted positions. Yeah. Like I'm not like the doctor in New Jersey who was celebrating. I'm like, he's not operating on me. I'll tell you that much. Like Reagan was joking.
Certainly
Reagan was
feels
joking.
comfortable with death.
Yeah, when Reagan went under the knife, it was like, I hope you're Republicans. That was a joke.
Yeah.
The reason it was funny is because we could all assume that even if they were Democrats, they were still going to work to save his life. But we can't make that assumption now.
But think back, what was that, 30 years ago, 40, I guess close to 40 years ago now. What was the doctor's response? It was, sir, today we're all Republicans.
Yeah.
And what a transformation.
Yeah. It has no feeling of the post 9/11 moment when you could walk into a grocery store and like strangers were just, locking eyes and everybody felt the same. There's like a weird social alienation that has descended upon us. And, I don't know what the role is of breaking that spell. Certainly it's to model yourself after Jesus, to take the approach that Charlie took. I know me personally, I want to, make a bigger effort to have, outreach to young people and to lift them up and give them, opportunities and coaching. I think a huge part of the legacy that Charlie leaves behind is because of how youth focused his entire movement was. The most precious resource you have is your time. And Charlie gave abundantly of his time, and he gave it to young people. And all the young people that I meet that were fans of his, whether they were part of Turning Point or just consumed his content, are also smart and graceful and understand. They just have this kind of like wisdom beyond their years of what needs to happen in this moment. And I had an experience. This was maybe a day or two after Charlie was assassinated. I had this experience I was having coffee at a coffee shop, and this group came in, and they were affluent, liberal women. You could just kind of tell. And they started having a conversation. I could hear they were talking about Charlie. And not in the way that you and I were talking about Charlie. And I just kind of tuned him out and was having a conversation with my friend. About 10 minutes later, this young guy gets up, and he's maybe 20 years old, and he just walks over and he says, hey, I can hear you guys are talking about Charlie Kirk, and I can hear what you're saying about him. And I just want you to know why so many of us really admired him and looked up to what he did, and just gave them like this perfectly calm, reasonable, rational, like Charlie Kirk-esque response, wasn't confrontational about it, and was just like, so thanks, and walked away.
Wow.
And it was powerful. And I was like, gripped by it. And one of the women muttered back like something about America being built on white supremacy or something. And I just went up and grabbed the guy and gave him a hug. I didn't know what else to do in that moment, but it was like such a powerful thing. This guy, like those moments, I think, are what it means to stop being conciliatory and to embrace a new boldness in public life. Is like at the workplace, like, you don't need to be obnoxious about your values. You know, we don't, just like we're not pleased with, you know, the Black Lives Matter and rainbow flags, the new religious idols of the left, like hanging in every public space. Like, you don't want to be, you don't want to be obnoxious about it, but also no more walking on eggshells.
Right.
Like there's no more, the only way you dispel the culture of fear that conservatives have in this state is by coming out and living your values publicly, and like being a public. You know, there's a lot of people who will never open a Bible. You know, for most people, like, you will be the expression of the Bible that they read. Charlie was the expression of the Bible that a lot of people first encountered.
Though an
So
awful lot of
live
them
like
are
that.
opening the Bible, from what I've seen online. And
Yeah. I mean, it's
curious.
It's. I mean, I meant what I said at the start of this. You know, the most successful evangelists of our time at the vigil in Augusta, I saw something that really I don't recall ever seeing, but someone came up to the pastor and like came to Christ like in that moment at the vigil.
Wow.
It was such a powerful moment. Like, as you know, someone, you know, they were like singing hymns and somebody was playing the guitar and she was standing there with the pastor praying, and it was so moving. And I was like, man, the influence that this guy has had is so awe-inspiring.
Yeah.
It like gives you goosebumps just thinking about the reverberations of his life and his legacy and his death. It's just it's hard to fathom, and it's hard to fathom just how quickly society changed.
So I referenced those missionaries at the beginning in 1956, and they motivated this missions movement, international missions movement around the world, and really changed the face of international missions. But it was really different, right? Because they were killed by natives who hadn't heard their story yet. They were killed because they were coming, but not because they'd heard their story. And I mean, we fast forward 75 years, and Charlie Kirk was killed because of the words he spoke. And my hope and my prayer is that among many other responses, that it makes an entire nation curious about the words that he spoke. Someone was willing to kill him for the words that he spoke. What words was he speaking? And we're seeing that just in the tenfold, I don't know, it's probably 100-fold views on the stuff that he had to say. But my hope is that like those missionaries transformed a generation of other missionaries, that Charlie Kirk and his story transforms the younger generation, and I hope my generation too, into generations of truth tellers, generations that are curious about what in the world Charlie Kirk was talking about. Where in the world he got that? Why does he care about marriage? Why does he care about men being men? Why does he care about kids and freedom? And how does it all tie together? I hope America becomes curious, and that they take this on, and that it transforms those generations. And I think it will, because the words of life that he spoke are so much more powerful than the actual life beating in his heart. And you can't, like, Satan can't stop that, right? And that's the other thing that we like to dance around. And I'm a good old Baptist. We don't talk about demons behind every bush or anything like that. But
I'm seeing them. I'm ready.
I mean, it could never be clearer.
Yeah, if
right?
you can't see the demons now, if this isn't a moment when the scales have fallen from your eyes, and you can see the work of the dark one, like
there is, let me take your life. Now, what's interesting is in the very first couple of chapters of Genesis, when Satan comes in the form of a serpent to Eve, his temptation was, he used the words, "Did God really say?" But did God really say that you're going to die? You're surely not going to die. And it was Satan's misconception that, or his temptation to help humans believe that the ultimate is a long physical life. That's not what God was talking about when he said, "You shall surely die." He was talking about eternity. He was talking about eternity with him. And Satan did the same thing. And I don't want anyone to confuse. I'm not comparing Charlie Kirk to Jesus, but when Jesus died and Satan thought, "Yeah, I got him, I killed him," and God was going, "No, this is the beginning of the story, because I have the power over life and death, and the words of life that are going to come from his physical death is going to transform not just a couple people, it's going to transform millions over generations, over thousands of years." And when the saints die, when they are martyred, God does a similar work in his people and on earth. And man, I have thought many times, like, what a misstep on their part. We're going to miss Charlie, and it has been a huge kick in the gut to think one of our conservative leaders nationally who is having such an impact is gone. But at the same time, what a misstep, guys, because the God of the universe is going to use the words of life that Charlie Kirk has been speaking, and he's going to raise up more than one Charlie Kirk in this whole mess.
Yeah. I mean, and Charlie is irreplaceable, was just a once in a generation talent. But there will be people who aspire to live a better life and be more energetic and more principled. There will be people who try to come closer to the ideal that Charlie set. And if that happens, then that's going to be a powerful force for good.
It's why I love that verse, and I keep going back to it, where the intellectual elite of the day realized that they were uneducated, common men, but they had been with Jesus. Because we can be uneducated and we can be common and we can have a pretty average intellect, but we can be with Jesus.
Yeah, I mean,
we can have that boldness.
In that coffee shop, the young guy, he was, I don't know, he could have been a tradesman. I don't know. We didn't talk or anything. The women who were talking were clearly college educated, affluent, Gucci handbags, and had their college educated opinions about what America stood for. But there was so much more wisdom in that young man, in part because he listened to Charlie Kirk talk about the Bible, and I'm sure had read the Bible. So there's a difference between wisdom and the intelligence that's collected on college campuses these days, supposedly. But I think it's very important to have perfect clarity about why Charlie was killed. As you said, he was killed because he was a Christian. I believe he is a Christian martyr. That will become very clear as time goes on.
If you don't think that today, you need to spend a minute listening to the things that he had to say, the words that he had to say. And it will take you about 5 minutes of scrolling videos, and you will agree. He absolutely a martyr for his faith.
And the more that comes out about the details of the plot, the conspiracy to assassinate him, for indeed, I've seen enough. I'm ready to weigh in. It was a left-wing transgender radical conspiracy that resulted in his life being taken. There were multiple people who had foreknowledge of the plot, the plan, posted things on social media about it. It was a conspiracy to murder Charlie Kirk. They were not motivated by this weird thing on the left, that there's this weird conspiracy theory that Jackie Sartorius posted about. And I'm just using her as an example because she's like the highest level elected official in the state who articulated this. But there were a lot of people in the state who used the Blue Sky social media app who had all convinced themselves of this just ridiculous, wild conspiracy theory that somehow exonerated the left for their advocacy of political violence, their support of political violence, and their the frequency with which they just tagged everybody as a fascist or a threat to democracy. That's why I think in this moment it's really important to be clear that Charlie was killed for being a Christian and for saying the things that Christians believe. And there were some conspiracy mongering on the right too about this being like a plot by the government of Israel because Charlie had said no to, powerful, donations to get him to sway his opinion on the topic of Israel. And, there may be some truth to Charlie saying, no to donations, or I know he was like battling with how to feel on the idea. He was a good temperature gauge of what young people were feeling on the topic of Israel. And I'm sure that he was communicating that to some powerful people who live more insulated existences. That probably made people very uncomfortable, but that is not why he was assassinated. He was assassinated for being a Christian who had Christian views. And that is something that should never be forgotten, should be clear. And again, elected officials who can't admit that, elected officials who still now are willing to call their political opponents fascists or whatever language they use to designate targets for violence, they should be drummed out of public life in a civil, cultural, way.
Yeah.
They should be ostracized. And
It should be unacceptable.
Yeah, and I don't know exactly how you facilitate that other than by drawing attention to it. Certainly, in our capacity at the Maine Wire, we're going to do plenty of drawing attention to these, teachers and public officials who are worthy of being ostracized from society and are worthy of being drummed out of culture. Like, go start an Etsy business or something, but you certainly shouldn't be working in an elementary school if those are the views that you have. But it should be clear that he was killed for being a Christian, and they don't know what they've done. They don't know what they've done, and I just feel blessed and honored to have been able to meet Charlie, and didn't really understand the significance of it at the time, and I wish I could have it back. And I guess maybe I'll get one of the pictures that was taken and have it framed and hung in the studio or something. Because it's not, again, it's not like I was the best man at his wedding or anything. I knew him for like a hot second. But I think he called me Scott Robinson later after the event. So we were not. A good Scott, yeah, I was gonna say we weren't close by any stretch of the imagination. But it was an honor to have met him. And man, what a life. What a life. It sets a new standard for how Christian men can behave and operate and go out and live in the world. And I know, you probably had some of the same thoughts, but it's like, damn, would my friends and family comport themselves like this? Like, what would people be saying about me if I was assassinated? Like, well, what changes do I need to make in my life so that in death I become so much more powerful? I mean, this is non-biblical, but he's like Obi-Wan Kenobi. You've struck him down, but there's this the voice of the dematerialized voice of Charlie Kirk is the conscience of all of these young people and older people all around the country that's saying no, you don't have to live this way. Yeah. You don't have to live in a degraded, dehumanized society. There is a better way to live. And there's a plan, believe it or not. It's been written down. There's some life wisdom that was written down. There's a plan for a better way of living, and you just have to choose it and be aggressive and affirmative at choosing it. And that's what it boils down to is making that choice. So it's a choice incumbent upon, I think, the right independents, moderates in this state choose the better way of living. Wake up every day and choose the better way of living, and eventually we'll have the kind of state and community that we all want to live in, that we all share as the common goal and the common destination. So Nick, thank you very much. I appreciate, as always,
Thank you, Steve.
your biblically informed wisdom here on the Robinson Report.
Thank you.